I'm going to show you how to use WordPress and WebStudio together. WordPress is going to be a headless CMS, so containing our blog data or just custom data. And WebStudio is going to be our front end built using an advanced visual builder and next-gen infrastructure, including the Cloudflare Edge. So if you already have data on WordPress or you like the WordPress blogging engine, but you want to use something a little bit more streamlined for the front end that uses, fast performance, next-gen infrastructure, no plugin bloat, that's going to be WebStudio. So these two can go really well together. We're going to be creating this very high level. We're going to have a blog overview page with links to each of our blog posts. We're going to be able to click on them and get all of our blog data on this one post. We'll do more like creating a sitemap too, but in order to get this, we first need to create a dynamic page, which essentially is going to be our blog template. One page that's going to dynamically swap out the information depending on which URL we're viewing. Next, we're going to set up the headless part of WordPress. So we're going to take our existing setup or a new WordPress site and turn it into headless. After that, we're going to fetch the data from WordPress and get it into WebStudio. Once we have that data, we're going to move on to binding the data or connecting the different pieces of information from WordPress, such as the title, and mapping it to our header component in WebStudio. Once we're done with our dynamic page, we're going to do a similar process, but we're going to create a blog overview page, which is going to list all of our blog posts and not just filter a single one. Lastly, we're going to create a dynamic sitemap. So it's going to bring in all of our URLs that exist in WordPress and print out in a sitemap so we can give to Google so they can crawl our site and understand when the posts were updated. Let's dive into creating a dynamic page in WebStudio. So right now I have a regular page, nothing special about it yet. We need to make it dynamic. In the blog path, I'm going to change this and do /blogs, and then we need a dynamic component. We're going to do this by typing : and then I'm going to use slug. We can use whatever we want. This is going to represent some value in the URL, and then we're going to take this value later and then query our WordPress posts for post or the post containing that value. For right now, I'm going to go up here and I'm just going to type in hello world. I've actually already have a little bit of a list here because this is something I've already done. So once you do it once, it'll be in here. This isn't going to do anything right now. It's just going to be a placeholder or a test value for later. But that's all we need to do for setting up the dynamic page. So we can check off step 1 and move on to setting up the headless part or turning WordPress into headless. I'm going to head over to my WordPress dashboard and let's go to my plugins page. For right now, there is just one thing you need to do. Install WordPress GraphQL. Once you do that, it's going to give us the ability to fetch information from WordPress in a nice and easy way. So if you've never had experience with any of this, we're going to be able to click it together without writing any code. But for right now, all you need to do is install this plugin and we've effectively set WordPress up to be headless. Now that WordPress is in a state that we can get the data how we want it, we need to fetch that data. So let's go over to WordPress, and now we have this GraphQL on the sidebar. If you've never worked with GraphQL, don't worry. There is the query composer here, and we're going to be able to click it together. I'm going to name this query blog. It doesn't matter what it is, but just so we can reference it. And now what we need to do is get one individual blog post. So there's posts and posts. We want one, so we're going to go posts. We're going to worry about filtering which posts in a little bit, but for right now, let's just click together the different fields we want. So we have the author, we'll expand that, and there's some stuff in here. I want to get the author's last name and the first name, and there's also an avatar. So let's expand this, and then we want the URL of that avatar, and then the width and height. Moving along, I want my categories in here. It's usually under nodes if there's extra stuff in there. And we're going to grab the name of the category. We could also grab the slug to it so we can link to it, but for right now, I'm good. We'll grab the content. This is going to be the body, and if there's ever a format, we want to grab rendered. We'll grab the date it was published, the featured image. Anytime we're grabbing an image, we typically want 4 things if they're available: the alt text, the source URL, or just some sort of URL. It might be called something different. And in the featured image, if we go to media details, we'll find the height and width. Continuing on, let's see what else we've got. A title, grab the format rendered. And lastly, I want to grab my advanced custom fields. So sometimes you have plugins that allow you to attach additional information to your WordPress posts. In this case, I'm using ACF. Now, if you're in here and you don't see something you're expecting to see, 1, look a little harder, maybe it's in there. But 2, it may not be in there because when custom plugins are added, they're not automatically adding to this GraphQL click together query. What you need to do is install third-party plugins. So if you're using Rank Math, install this and your Rank Math data will be exposed. In the case of advanced custom fields, I'm using this one, and because of that, I can go to CTA, which is my advanced custom fields on this post, and grab the title and URL. Right now, we're saying we want a certain post, but we're not telling it which post we want. So let's give it a condition of filter. We can see that ID is already checked, and we could just say, I want the post that matches hello world, but then it would always give us hello world, where in fact, we want to actually map it to something dynamic, and it's going to be that dynamic part of the URL. This will all come together if it doesn't make sense yet, but for right now, all we know is that we don't know what the parameter or that value is. So we're going to click the $, and this is going to make it dynamic. Next, we need to tell it, well, what type of ID are we going to give it? Are we going to give it the post ID? Well, no, we want to actually give it a slug. The slug is going to be a natural fit to the URL, not just some sort of random ID. Now we're saying we're going to pass it a slug. We don't know which one, but once you do have it, use that slug to filter the post, to filter all of the posts and get the single post that we want. And we can test this out right here by expanding query variables, and we're going to do a couple brackets. And in here, I'm going to type ID, enter, and let's give it some test value. I have a post called hello world, or with a slug hello world, and let's now play and see what we get. We have our post data. We can see there's an author with a first and last name and a bunch of other information here. All right, now let's take this and bring it into WebStudio. We're going to copy this query, head over to WebStudio, and on the body, we're going to create a new variable. This variable is going to be GraphQL because we're using GraphQL. It's basically resource, but it has special fields that make it nice and easy to interact with GraphQL, such as having this query field, which we could just paste in directly what we put together in WordPress. And let's name this CMS data, WordPress Post, WordPress blog, whatever you want. And for the URL, we're going to grab the default URL, the root path, and then we're just going to append GraphQL. When we installed the GraphQL plugin, it automatically creates this endpoint. Lastly, we need to add our variables. Now, you notice down here we did this. If I were to paste this in, it's always going to get the hello world post. Here's where we need to make it dynamic and say, instead of hello world, pass it whatever value is in the URL. To make this dynamic, we need to use expression editor. I'm going to open that by clicking the plus. And in here, I'm going to change it up. We actually don't need these quotes, so I can get rid of them. I don't think they'll do anything, but we'll just get rid of them. And instead of this static value, let's make it dynamic. Let's use a variable. We can see above there's this system JSON variable. So I'm going to type in system and then period, and that's going to give me its child fields. This is a parameter, so we're going to select params, and then in here we should see slug and then our test value, which was hello world. Let's grab that and click out of here. Now we see that some JSON was returned, so we're going to inspect this and see the exact data that we were seeing in WordPress. So we've effectively fetched the data from WordPress into WebStudio. Let's check this off and now take that data and bind it. When we think about binding data, we're going to be taking the values like James Bond and mapping it or binding it to this author text right here. Let's start with the header, and we're going to click it and go to the text content and open that expression editor. We now have our CMS data variable, which we can click on and use the period and drill down into the data. So we're going to go .data, .post, and now we can see the various fields we have. We're going to go title, click enter, and click off. We now have a dynamic component here, and I'm going to show you what I mean by dynamic. I'm going to go to my parameter here and use a different value. I'm going to click that, and now we have a different value getting mapped here because we're viewing a different URL. Now we can take the rest of the data we have and map it to the various components. What I like to do is copy the part that's always the same just before the period and paste it in, and now I can go featured image, dot, and anytime we see JSON right here, it means that there's more data. There's a list of data in there. So I'm going to click that and grab the source URL. And once I click out, we'll see that image get mapped. Now let's grab that width and height that we were grabbing from the GraphQL and the alt text. Now let's do the author field. There's something special about this one. There because if you recall, the author first name and last name are two separate pieces of information. So we have first name, and now we want to merge it together, glue it together, or the proper term is concatenate it with the last name. There's several different ways to do this. We are going to use some simple JavaScript, which is plus, and then we want to put a space in between first and last name, and then another plus, and then grab all of this and say last name. And now when we click out, we'll see we've got James space Bond. There's another special component I'm going to show you, which is date time. When we grab the date time from the CMS, oftentimes it's stored in an ugly format that we need to make presentable to humans. So with the date time, we're able to format it with a language, country, date style. So I can go for a full one if I want, but I like medium for blog posts. We could even bind the language values to values in the CMS to create localized content. Everything can be localized. Now I want to style this header out. Let's do that real quick. And I have a token called color primary 500, and let's give it the title huge token. That looks good. Let's move on to binding the body. We're going to use a special component called content embed. We'll see some default text, but let's bind the actual body value to the code field here. That's going to be the content. Great. Now we have our content pulling in. But how do I style this heading 2 or this link? In the other components on the page, we click on them and we style them. We click on them and style them. How do we get to the HTML content? Anytime we click on it, we get this content embed. Well, one of the really cool things about content embed is that if you expand this, you get all the different tags you're able to style. So let's select heading 2 and give it that same color primary 500 token. And now we can see it turned to purple. For our links, let's take this and then bind, or rather select the button link token to it. And now we have a nice hover effect on all of the links. So anytime you change one of these child elements in the content embed, they will affect all child elements within the HTML. This enables you to use the power and flexibility and the same way that you style the rest of the site, but within rich text that exists in an external system, in this case, WordPress as a headless CMS. This is looking really good. I want to show you one more area before I finish binding everything on this page, and that's going to be this section here. This is a CTA I have. I'm going to bind my CTA values to this, and there's something else I want to do. My CTA may or may not exist on my post, so I need to conditionally render this section. We have a show field right here. If we turn it off, it completely removes it from rendering. It's different than using like display none, because that'll still be in the HTML, it just won't visually display. But using the show field will completely take it out. We need to conditionally display this section, conditionally turn on show. It's on if it's true and it's off if it's false. So what we need to do is drill down into our post and CTA, and I'll just grab the title. And we need to say if the title exists, then show the section. If the title does not exist, hide the section. We're going to use something called the ternary operator, which is a JavaScript expression. It's very simple. We're going to put our condition, which is just the title, and we're going to say question mark, and then anything after this is if it's true, we're going to print out true, and if it's false, we're going to use a colon, print out false. So this basically says if this value is there, print out true. If it's not there, print out false. And now this value will dynamically turn on or off depending on if there is a CTA in the WordPress blog post. So I'm mapping the author profile image, and there's no alt text that we're saving in the CMS, but the alt text really is just a picture of the author. So let's use something we learned previously to dynamically print out an alt text. We want to say picture of James Bond. Now, if you recall, we needed to do picture of in quotes and then plus James and then plus a space and then plus Bond. It's a lot to do. So I'm going to show you a different method. Using the plus is nice for just two different items to glue them together, but when you have three or more, it can get a little complex. We're going to use something called template literals. These are going to be two backticks, and now I can just type in picture of, and that's just going to be static. It's always going to be picture of. Now we need to change it into dynamic mode. We're going to say picture of James Bond. So we're going to use $ in brackets. And now in the brackets, we can actually access our CMS data. And let's grab that author value. And now I can just put a space because I don't need to do any plus or anything like that. And let's just copy this so it's a little bit easier to drill down, paste it, and change first name to last name. Cool. Now if I click out of here, we can see that we have picture of James Bond. There's one more area that's important to bind, and that's the page settings. So if we open up the page settings, there are a few different places. The title. So let's grab our title. We already have this bound over here, so it'll just be easier to access it over here. And there we go. I don't have a meta description saved in the post, so I'm going to skip that for right now. And then for the image, let's grab what we've already done over here and paste it into the social image. Great. One more thing for this step, and that's the status code. Currently, no matter what value we put here, it's going to say 200, which means the post exists, but that's not good. We need to output 404 if the page does not exist. Let's add the condition we already learned, which is that ternary operator. Open the expression editor, and we need to grab some value from the post. I'm going to grab the title. You just want something that you know if there's no title, then there's no post. You can grab the ID, you can grab the slug, whatever you want. And then we're going to do that question mark. So if it's true, meaning if it exists, print out 200. And if it's false or if it does not exist, print out 404. Now, status code will show 200. And to demo this, I'm going to grab some URL that's made up. Now we can see it prints out 404. Let's go back to our hello world. We can also just swap to another URL we know exists, and we can see the information dynamically swap out. But we have bound the data. We've taken the data from WordPress and we've bound it to the various components in WebStudio. Now let's move on to the different page and create a blog overview. That's going to be the page that lists all of our blog posts. So currently I have this one card designed with no data in it. And let's start by fetching all of the posts. So let's create a new query, and we can call this blogs or posts. And this time, instead of selecting the singular, we're going to grab the plural posts. And we're going to grab nodes. And what do we want from here? We're going to want the title in that rendered format. We're going to grab the slug so we can link to it. And we need the image. So that should be featured image. Always grabbing the alt text in the media details, the height and the width, and the source URL. And I'm going to click play and run our blogs. And we can see that there's a list of nodes. We've got 1 title, 2 titles, and 3 posts. So this is what we want. Now I'm going to copy this, but be careful not to copy everything because we both have our blog and blogs. We just want blogs. Head over to WebStudio, create a new variable, pretty similar to last time. We'll call it CMS data and GraphQL, paste in our query, and same URL, which is our base path / GraphQL, and no variables because there's nothing dynamic about this. We're just always going to get a list of posts. It's not going to change based on whether or not there's a certain value in the URL. Let's inspect it, and we see the same information we saw in WordPress. So we fetch the data. Now we need to bind the data. Previously, we were taking title, image, and so forth, but we have a list of posts now. So we need to basically duplicate this for every single blog post. Of course, we're not going to manually do that. We're going to add a component called collection, which allows you to iterate over the results. In collection, we are going to go to the data, and in CMS data, we are going to get the list. So there's a couple of things above the list of posts, the .data, .posts, .nodes. And as soon as we hit the numbers, we want to backspace. The 0 represents the first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one. So I don't want to grab a single one. I want to grab all of them. There's a default variable on collections called collection item. I'm just going to call this blog item so I know what it is. We can see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 boxes because it knows that there's 4 posts. But I'm going to delete those because I already have designed this content card out. I'm just going to drag it in, and now you can see it'll duplicate it 4 times. Now anything I do to one of these, it does to all of them. And now let's bind the data. But instead of using our CMS data, we're going to use the blog item because this is going to represent the current iteration of the blog post. So I'm going to grab the source URL, and you'll see it automatically output the image based on the current iteration. Let's grab that alt text. I'm just going to use a default width and height to save some time right now. And let's move on to the last place we need to bind, which is the link. Now, this is a little bit unique because the link that we need to bind is going to be more than just the slug. If I just select slug, it's going to link to hello world. But if you recall, we need to link to our dynamic page, which is /blogs/slug. So currently we just have the slug in there. We actually need to open this, add on /blogs, and we'll use that plus method we used before to concatenate them. Oh, I thought I already got the header, but let me just grab the title if I didn't do that already. We can see if we go to the card, we've got /blogs hello world. And if I go to the next card, it's going to link to all of our blog posts, and we can test this out by clicking on them. And now we have this one. And if I go back, we really need a navigation, but we'll change that out to this one. That momentary flash you're seeing is only in the editor. That won't actually happen on the live site. Very cool. So we've created a blog overview. People can navigate a list of blog posts, click into them, and get a page that represents that post. Finally, let's move on to building a dynamic sitemap. We have a list of posts in our CMS. WebStudio automatically outputs a sitemap for our homepage, about page, any of these static pages. But in the case of this dynamic blog page, that list of posts or slugs or URLs exists in WordPress. So we need to bring those in and create a dynamic sitemap. We're going to do that by going to the marketplace, because who wants to build a sitemap from scratch, and select CMS sitemap and then select the sitemap. This will create a new page. Let's just note a couple things. It uses /sitemap.xml. This will override the existing WebStudio sitemap. And I'll show you how to make sure we bring in both the static and dynamic data. We're also using the document type of XML. All right, let's go to the sitemap, and you'll see that we've got this new component. It's called the XML node, and that's going to help us build the sitemap, but we don't really need to know that because it's already built. We have two collections, static and dynamic. Static is going to be our static pages like home and about. The way these are being retrieved, and it's automatically done for us, is instead of the GraphQL resource that we were using, it's system resource, and in here is sitemap, which brings in a list of our static pages. There's nothing we need to do for static. It's automatically going to pull in our site origin, which will automatically change once it's published. It'll take in whatever the current URL is, and it has a list of pages. For dynamic, we need to tell it where our dynamic URLs are at, and that's in WordPress. So we're going to create a new variable once more. We're going to call this CMS data. We can get more creative, but I'm just going to keep it that for now. GraphQL, and you know what we need to do. Just assemble a quick query that grabs our URLs and the last time they were modified. New query, I'm just going to call this sitemap. We're going to grab our posts and those two things we need, the slug and the modified time. That's it. We'll grab this, paste it in the query, use that URL, click out of here, inspect, and we have a list of slugs and last modified. So let's take those pieces of information and bind it to our collection. Once we get to those numbers, we'll stop, and now we have a list of them. And now let's go to one of these items, and location, under text content, let's grab our dynamic item and the slug. But there's two things we need to do. The first is add our URL. So to make this easy, I'm going to use those backticks, $ brackets, and then do the system.origin. So this is going to be our URL. And then it's going to be /blogs/ and then the dynamic slug. Now if we close out, we can verify we've got our URL, blogs, hello world. We need to do the last mod, so we'll just grab the dynamic item and then the modified time. And now Google will know the last time these posts were updated. Just like that, we have built a dynamic sitemap that's ready to give to Google so they can crawl our website and know the last time that our CMS items were updated, even though they exist in a separate system. So we can check that off. WordPress has a great blogging engine, but WebStudio has a great front-end visual builder. Being able to decouple these gives you a lot more flexibility. You could even use other CMSs or databases if you want. So WordPress is just one different backend, but if you also want to bring in, say, Airtable data for a different type of piece of information on the website, you can totally do that using other resources. And when you publish this, it'll be published to the Cloudflare edge. All of this fetching will happen at the edge, which means it's going to be milliseconds away from any user on Earth. It's going to happen lightning fast, and it's all dynamic. So you can just update your WordPress post, not have to worry about what's going on in WebStudio. And as soon as you update WordPress, those posts are going to be available on your website. There are endless possibilities with this. I hope you build something really cool, and we'll see you in the next one.